inform the class on the etymology, the etymology and the mysteries of Lake Norman. The local lake, Lake Norman, had many mysteries dealing with the formation and what lies beneath its waters. According to Our State magazine, many properties, including people's houses and their farms, were all engulfed by the Duke Powers project of forming Lake Norman. I found this to be interesting to us because it is close to like a lot of the like counties nearby and to a lot of us. It's also close to me because I recently moved to Lake Norman and I wanted to learn more about like how it came to be. Tonight I'll go over the etymology and what actually lies beneath the water's depths. Okay, so the cotton mill was one of the things that was engulfed by the formation of Lake Norman. It was on the left, and the water actually just kind of like flooded through it and eventually went over the entire mill. They started this project during 1959 to 1964, Duke Power did. It entailed moving mills like this one, cemeteries, houses, farms, like I said earlier, and even bridges. And the structures like weren't raised at all. So Duke Power, to be able to do this, they bought the land from the like homeowners and I guess the mill owners too. But I found like the information on them buying land from homeowners. And so when they told the homeowners like, we'll compensate you for your house, they were still the owners of the house, but they just got the land. But when they were compensated for their homes, they didn't get as like enough to move and like buy land somewhere else. So the houses were also just engulfed by Lake Norman when the lake started to fill up. And then the cemeteries also. So Duke Power contacted the families of those buried in the cemeteries that like Lake Norman was going to like flood over, and they asked if it was okay, like the permission to move the cemeteries. But the sad part is like a lot of the cemeteries are like headstones. They moved the actual headstone, but they left the bodies like remains, so those are still like under the lake. And then this was another mill, and just like the other mill I showed, the East Mambo mill was the water just like flooded through it and eventually took over it as well. And then just like the people who worked there, their homes, they compensated them for the land, but they still like, they kind of just got out like on the bad end because they didn't have enough money to buy land somewhere else. And then, so the old Highway 150 bridge, they had to rebuild it as well because it also, Lake Norman went over it. So they built a new 150 bridge and they moved it 100 feet north of where the old one lies and 33 feet higher. And then this was the old Beatty's Ford Bridge, and it now lies like 75 feet below the water. One of the other things that got flooded over was a battle of the Revolutionary War. Some of the land it was fought on. Lake Norman, it's now underneath Lake Norman because it was fought there and the water went over it. So the benefits of actually forming this man-made lake was to provide a fresh water source and then to provide the electricity for the outlying counties. The lake provides fresh water to Lincoln County, Davidson, Mooresville, Charlotte-Mecklenburg, and Huntersville. And you can kind of see the size of it there as well. I have another map of how large the lake actually is. So it has 500 miles of shoreline and 32,000 acres of surface area. So it's a really large lake. It's actually known as an inland sea because of the size. And then also, with the size being as large it is, due to the enormity and depths of the lake, there's many myths and tragedies that go along with it. So one of the biggest myths that I've heard and with research found was Normie, the Lake Norman monster. And most people are saying it's a really large catfish people have spotted. So there's no known truth to it, so it is a myth or a story, I guess. But an article I found also on this was the Army Corps engineers, the divers went down to work on one of the dams, and they refused, they came right back up because they refused to keep working on it because one of the men saw a fish that was he quoted it was large enough to swallow a man, so they came up and didn't go back down. So then the Army Corps like sent another group of new men down to work on it again, and those men came back up and said the same thing. So like it hasn't actually like been photographed. I guess that one's just kind of like what it's supposed to look like. So that was just a little story that I thought was interesting, that two groups of men came up because the fish was large enough to swallow them, they said. And then along with the tragedies, a plane was found by the Charlotte Fire Department in 2013, and it had been there since 1974. It was 90 feet below the water, so like you couldn't see it at the surface, or like no one had any indication that it was there. But also like other than like planes and like those kind of tragedies, there's a lot of deaths that occur just from like everyday like recreational uses. People like will go swimming and dive into the water. You'll hear like a lot of like sad stories of like friends who will dive in and like won't come back up, and they won't be able to like find the bodies or anything till later. One of the WBTV news articles wrote of a little boy who had like drowned and they couldn't find his body, so the Charlotte Fire Department went looking for them, and one of the firefighters like went down with a dive group, and he was they went diving looking for his body, and then he didn't come back up because they don't have a reason. All the other like group members came up. He wasn't alone or anything, and so they said that later on they kept diving looking for his body now and the boy who drowned, and they found both of them. And the boy who had drowned, they knew his causation of death, and then they never like had an actual like reason for why the firefighter died. So there's just like a lot of like unknown like tragedies that occur there. So like it has this like fun recreational, but also a lot of like sadness due to the depths and like mysteries of the water. And then in conclusion, just due to the enormity of the lake and how far it stretches across the vast amount of counties and acres, there's many mysteries and tragedies associated with this local lake. And then I also took a picture of like during the day. I thought it was really pretty. It's almost like the glass water, like you can like see like a mirrored image. And then many discoveries are continuing to be made about the lake and what lurks underneath its waters, and who all knows what will be found